Hey folks, in July of 2019, 19-year-old Rhys Bonner left his family home in the East End of Glasgow to meet up with friends. He was expected back later that night. He had no phone or money with him, and as far as his family knew, there was no reason why he would not come home. Just over 2 weeks later, Rhys was found partially submerged in an area of marshland on Glasgow's eastern outskirts. You might think that the discovery of his body would have brought some kind of an answer as to what had happened, but it really only marked the beginning of a second unknown. Analysis proved to be inconclusive, and his cause of passing could not be established. His family would later discover that the police investigation had apparently been closed just 4 days after he was found, and before he had been formally identified. Police Scotland have always maintained that they established no criminality surrounding Rhys's passing. His mother, Stephanie, believes that there were too many unanswered questions for that conclusion to have been reached so early. What followed was a long complaints process, findings that some complaints had been mishandled, having to give evidence before the Scottish Parliament, and a campaign that would eventually become part of a much larger discussion about how these unexplained incidents are dealt with in Scotland. But before getting into all of that, it's important to understand who Rhys was and what happened in the final hours that can actually be pieced together. As said, Rhys lived with his family in Glasgow's East End. He was approximately 6 feet tall, slim with short brown hair, and his mum would later describe him as a gentle giant. He was her firstborn son and was very close to his family, especially his younger siblings and his grandparents, who he would regularly go and visit. He enjoyed playing basketball and PlayStation, and he was a big supporter of Celtic Football Club. Rhys also had a job, though I can't find anything reliable that says where he worked or exactly what he did. His mum recalled that when he had been paid, he would sometimes buy her cake or take her out for something to eat. It was just one of those little things that stuck in her memory afterwards, and it showed the kind of relationship that they had. Stephanie described him as healthy, happy, caring, and easygoing. She said that he wasn't usually someone who got himself into trouble, and importantly for what would happen, he remained in regular contact with his family. There is no reliable public information to suggest that he was dealing with some kind of serious health problem or mental health crisis at the time. From everything that's been said about him, it appears as though he was just an ordinary 19-year-old who was actively involved in family life. On Wednesday, the 24th of July 2019, Rhys left the house after saying that he was going to meet a friend, or some friends, and that the exact time that he left the home has never been made clear as far as I can tell, but everyone expected him to return later that night. A later account said that he planned to come back to watch the football, so this was not supposed to be an overnight trip or anything unusual. Rhys didn't have his mobile phone or any money with him when he left. I'm not sure why he went out without them, but it meant that after he disappeared, there was no phone signal to trace, no calls or messages to follow, and no social media activity or mobile data activity that could place him anywhere. There are also no publicly reported bank transactions connected to his movements that night. It left investigators and the family heavily dependent on CCTV and witnesses from the very beginning. The strongest confirmed sighting came from the shops on Conisbrough Road in Easterhouse. At approximately 7:55 PM, Rhys was seen there in the company of a woman that was older than himself. The two of them then walked along Conisbrough Road before turning into Gardine Street. This was the sequence published in the original police appeal, and at that stage it was described as his last confirmed sighting. The family's reconstruction provided more information about where Rhys had apparently gone. According to that account, he and the woman walked towards the shops on Conisbrough Road, and she entered an off-licence while he waited outside. They then continued through the Gardine housing area and towards Balkervie Road. At some point, the woman was said to have sat on a trailer and became involved in an argument with the owner of it. Rhys and the woman were then believed to have remained around the street for a while. Witnesses who were later approached by the family reportedly said that they saw Rhys entering the Seven Locks wetland area with her, and that he was still wearing his baseball cap at the time. If that account is accurate, it potentially moves his last known location much closer to the marshland where he was eventually found. However, it is worth being careful with this part. The route was put together after the initial police appeal, and the full CCTV, original witness statements, and exact timings have never been made public. It isn't clear which details came directly from video, which came from people spoken to later, or how those accounts were checked. So the safest way to put it is that Rhys was definitely seen with the woman around Conisborough Road and Godine Street at roughly 7:45 to 7:55 PM, while the later journey towards Balcavie Road and into the wetlands comes from the reconstruction. Being the last known person seen with someone is obviously important to a timeline, but it is not evidence of wrongdoing by itself, and there has never been a prosecution or anything like that relating to this. After that evening, there is no further independently confirmed public sighting of Rhys. He didn't come home to watch the football, and there was no message to explain where he was. Since he had left his phone behind, there wasn't even the possibility of seeing that a message had been delivered or that a device had briefly reconnected somewhere else. At some point after entering that part of Easterhouse, Rhys simply disappeared. His family reported him missing on Friday the 26th of July, 2 days after having left home. I'd have to imagine that the 2-day wait to file a missing persons report was likely because it's not exactly unreasonable for a 19-year-old to be staying over at friends' houses, or such things, for a few days. It was probably the case that nobody thought too much of his absence until that second day, when Rhys still hadn't been heard from. Of course, this was made even worse because of the fact that he didn't have his phone on him. What can be said is that the formal missing person incident began on the 26th, and by that time, CCTV and witness memories from Wednesday evening were already becoming increasingly important. On Tuesday, the 30th, 6 days after Rhys was last seen, Police Scotland issued a public appeal. Inspector Brian Fraser emphasised that Rhys normally stayed in contact with his family, and that this complete silence was out of character. Officers said that they were reviewing CCTV, carrying out searches of the local area, and speaking with relatives and friends in an attempt to understand where he had gone. At the same time, Rhys's family and friends were conducting a very visible campaign of their own. They circulated his picture on social media, handed out posters, and shared CCTV images in the hopes that someone would recognise him. Only a small number of potential sightings seemed to come in. None of them provided that clear next step that everyone was looking for. There was also some confusion in the descriptions of what Rhys had been wearing. The confusion was surrounding his shorts and trousers. Some reported that on the day he went missing, he was wearing trousers, while others reported that he was wearing shorts. From what I can understand, he ended up wearing these shorts beneath his trousers, so he had both on. That may not seem like much, but Rhys's clothing would later become one of the more unusual aspects of the case, so it's important to understand what he was wearing. By the 6th of August, Rhys had already been missing for almost 2 weeks. Stephanie made another public appeal, while the police continued to refer to the sighting at approximately 7:55 PM, and asked anyone with information to contact officers in Shettleston. For the family, this will have been almost 2 weeks of living with no idea whether Rhys was hiding somewhere, injured, being held against his will, or had somehow travelled out of the area entirely. The search then began to focus on the marshland to the east of Glasgow. A later account said that information supplied by the woman who had been with Rhys, alongside other police inquiries, led officers to search a particular area where some of his clothing was then found. There is no complete search log in the public record, so it's difficult to know which parts of the wetlands had already been checked, how many times they'd been searched, or exactly when the clothing was first discovered. However, with that being said, it is thought that the clothing was found around 1 week into the search, so a reasonable time frame might be around the 31st of July or around the 1st of August. Then 1 week later, at around 12:30 PM on Thursday the 8th of August, officers from Police Scotland's Dive and Marine Unit were searching the marsh ground between Easterhouse and Gartlock Village. This wider area is now commonly described in reports as the Seven Locks Wetland Park. It is waterlogged, boggy terrain, so it's a mixture of standing water, soft saturated ground and thick vegetation. Water can look shallow, but actually be much deeper than it would appear. There, almost 15 days after Rhys had gone missing, they found remains semi-submerged in the marshland. Formal identification had not yet taken place when the discovery was announced, but Rhys's family had already been informed. This would unfortunately later be identified as being him. The cause was described as unexplained. A medical examination was arranged, and a report was to be submitted to the Procurator Fiscal, who has responsibility for investigating sudden and unexplained passings in Scotland. The condition in which Rhys was found immediately created questions that have never been answered to his family's satisfaction. He reportedly had no shoes or socks on, and was clothesless from the waist down. His trousers and shoes were said by the family to have been found separately, approximately 20 yards away, and Stephanie has said that items of his clothing were scattered around the area. The family also said that the shorts believed to have been underneath his trousers were never recovered. His grey baseball cap was apparently found at a later stage in a close on Loch Docket Road, away from the body, and the family described it as though it had been freshly washed. It's easy to see why this would have deeply concerned them though. I'm having to come back to add this in, but I thought this was weird and needed to be included here. So hopefully, the even further future me has found an appropriate spot to place this. On the 23rd of July 2020, it was reported that when items of his clothing were beginning to be found, apparently they found one of his trainers up a tree. I'm not sure if any other items were elevated like that. I'm not sure how to account for the trainer being up there. I'm not sure how high it was, but it suggests that it could have been thrown up there. And that, obviously, isn't something that happens by accident. It is important to state clearly that nothing has ever been proven in terms of someone doing this or playing some role in it. And there seems to be no direct evidence for that, but I can certainly see why the combination of all of this would make people suspect foul play. It's difficult to extrapolate on that information, though I felt it needed including. If Rhys had simply become disoriented and accidentally entered the water, why were his trousers, shoes and socks off? Where were the shorts? And if the cap was still on his head when witnesses reportedly saw him entering the wetland area, how did it end up in a residential area and apparently in a clean condition? There may be innocent explanations for each of those things, but none has been publicly established. The decomposition of the remains after around 2 weeks outside severely limited what the medical examination could determine. In January of 2020, it was reported that the medical examination had been inconclusive. After some analysis, it was said that Rhys could have been drinking beforehand, though only a trace amount was detectable. It is important to say that this is not evidence that he had been drinking though, as the decomposition process itself can cause trace amounts to be found. It was also stated that another substance may have been found too, but the final cause of his passing remained unascertained. The discovery of Rhys also led to a second issue involving the location itself. A local resident had recorded footage of 4 Marine unit officers in red uniforms moving the remains in a bag across the difficult ground with the use of ropes. It also seemed to suggest that the body may have been recovered somewhere other than the location that the family had been given. The family had been laying flowers and tributes at what they believed was the place where Rhys had been found. After viewing the residents' recording, they realised that the actual recovery point appeared to have been around 800 feet away. That seems like an odd thing to have gotten wrong. I'm not really sure what was going on there. Police Scotland said that a typographical error in correspondence may have caused confusion over the coordinates. There's a few seemingly small strange things that happened in this case. For example, not only was the location wrong, but then there was a disagreement about a map that the family said that they've been given, which indicated where Rhys had been found with an X. The police disputed giving the family that map, but the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner would later say that further work should have been done to establish where it had come from. So even something as basic as a map and the exact place that Rhys was found became part of a formal complaint. Then there is the date on which the investigation was apparently closed. Stephanie later told the Scottish Parliament that Police Scotland closed it on Monday the 12th of August, just 4 days after the recovery. According to what she had been told, It was categorised as a missing person who had been found with no suspicious circumstances. At the point that the case was closed, Rhys had not even been formally identified according to Stephanie's evidence. The results of the medical examination and the related tests were also not available. The family were not told that the investigation had been closed, and she said that they only discovered it later. If that date reflects the point at which substantive police inquiries stopped, it is very difficult to understand how a conclusion of no suspicious circumstances could have been securely reached before other forensic work had come back, unless I'm misunderstanding something there. There is a complication though, because closing a Police Scotland investigation did not necessarily end every part of the state's examination into the incident. A report had been sent to the Procurator Fiscal, and the Crown Office could still instruct further work. We do not have the decision chain or correspondence needed to understand what close meant internally here, whether it referred specifically to the missing person case, or what inquiries the Crown may still have been considering. I can see why this information must have been frustrating and a bit confusing. Back in January of 2020, when the inconclusive results first came in, Police Scotland said a report into the circumstances surrounding Rhys's passing had been handed over to the Procurator Fiscal and that they were waiting for guidance. Stephanie later told MSPs that her representative had also received written confirmation in February of 2020, saying that the investigation was still ongoing. Yet the family would then discover the police file had apparently been closed on the 12th of August the year before. By April, the wording had shifted. Chief Inspector Patrick Murphy said Rhys's passing had been fully investigated by a dedicated team of officers who found no criminality, and that a report had been passed to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. A Crown Office spokesman then said the investigation was finished and that no further work was needed. It's possible the police and the Crown were talking about different processes, or that limited inquiries were still being followed up after things were administratively closed off. But as far as I can tell, no one has ever laid out a clear explanation as to exactly what was happening. The original question was what happened to Rhys after he was seen in Easterhouse. The family now had an additional question. What did the police actually do to find out? If they believed that an active investigation was continuing, they could reasonably assume that officers were collecting remaining CCTV, speaking to neighbours around the recovery area, and resolving the questions surrounding his clothing. If the inquiry had already stopped, every passing week made that evidence harder to obtain. In February of 2020, Stephanie began working with community campaigner Alex O'Kane, and on the 6th of March, a formal complaint was made against Police Scotland. The complaint would eventually grow to 26 separate points concerning the investigation, communication with the family, the recovery location, and the way their concerns were dealt with. One of those complaints was upheld by Police Scotland itself. Officers had failed to carry out door-to-door inquiries near the area where Rhys's body was recovered. That is a confirmed omission rather than speculation from the family. In an unexplained passing where the final movements are uncertain, asking nearby residents what they saw or heard would seem to be one of the most basic ways of trying to find witnesses, and it becomes far less useful if it's only done months or years later. The family also said that they had to obtain CCTV and carry out their own door-to-door work. Stephanie did not accept the remaining complaints had been dealt with properly, so the case was taken to the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, generally shortened to PIRC, or PERC as we'll call them, and she did that for an independent complaint handling review. On the 30th of November 2022, PERC issued its findings to the family. It concluded that Police Scotland had mishandled 4 points of complaint. These concerned the inaccurate coordinates for the recovery site, the fact that the family had undertaken their own inquiries, the disputed map, and a failure to properly arrange a site visit or address the contradictions and general oddities really that the family had raised. PERC recommended that further inquiries should be made and some of the complaints reassessed. There is an important limitation to that finding. PERC was examining how Police Scotland handled the complaints. it was not conducting a new criminal investigation into Rhys's passing. It did not find that Rhys had been involved in foul play, and it did not find that any particular person was responsible. Some posts online have compressed the outcome to the idea that an independent body proved the original case was not investigated, but that seems to go further than what the review actually did. At the same time, the review wasn't meaningless either. Police Scotland had already accepted that the door-to-door inquiries were not carried out, while PERC found that important concerns over the coordinates, the family's evidence, and the recovery site had not been handled properly. Those failures do not prove foul play, but they do help to explain why Stephanie had so little confidence in the conclusion that no criminality had happened here. The campaign then moved into the Scottish Parliament. A petition known as PE 1948 called for improvements in the way these unexplained incidents were handled, from the recovery of a person through to the investigation itself, and the support given to their family. It was not asking the members of the Scottish Parliament to decide who caused Rhys's passing, but to look at the wider system that had left his family fighting for really what should be basic information. On the 22nd of February 2023, Stephanie gave evidence to MSPs. She spoke about who Rhys was, the condition in which he was found, the location dispute, the inquiries the family had carried out, and the discovery that the police investigation had apparently been closed in August of 2019. She believed that assumptions had been made about Rhys because of his age, the area he came from, and that officers had been drawn towards a theory of Rhys purposefully doing this, or a substance-related passing at a time when such cases were being widely reported. In her view, those assumptions caused investigators to settle on a non-suspicious explanation far too soon. Those particular motives have not been independently proven, but the central issue she raised is easy enough to understand. The cause of Rhys's passing was unascertained. Examinations did not establish an accidental passing, and yet the family felt that the case had been treated as though an accident had effectively already been decided. The parliamentary petition was closed in January of 2024, though not because Rhys's case had suddenly been resolved. Its concerns were passed into the Criminal Justice Committee's wider work on police ethics, conduct and scrutiny. Stephanie gave evidence again in April and said that 2 additional complaint points had recently been upheld by PERC, this time concerning later police contact with her and her representative. Those issues were about the relationship between the family and the police after the case, rather than new evidence explaining what happened to Rhys. The wider reform process eventually resulted in the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Scotland Act of 2025. The bill passed in January of 2025 received royal assent on the 4th of March, and some of its first provisions came into force that June. Rhys's case and Stephanie's evidence formed part of the scrutiny surrounding those changes, but I don't think it would be accurate to say that this law was created solely because of him. The reforms mainly came out of a much broader independent review of police complaints and misconduct across Scotland. Still, it is quite an extraordinary distance for this case to have travelled. What began with a teenager leaving his home to meet with friends, ended with his mum sitting before the Scottish Parliament, describing how a family came to investigate elements of his final movements themselves. It brought some recognition of what had gone wrong, but it did not provide the one answer that the family had been seeking from the beginning. So, what might actually have happened to Rhys? One possibility is that he passed away accidentally in the marshland, perhaps after becoming disoriented or impaired. His body was found partially submerged, and it's possible that he may have taken something, though it's not clear. The police have also consistently said that they established no evidence of criminality. Wetland and marsh terrain can be dangerous, particularly in darkness, and someone who stumbled into deep water or soft ground could quickly get into serious trouble, especially so if they weren't fully about themselves at the time they did it. The problem with presenting that as the answer is that the medical evidence did not establish it. Examinations were inconclusive and the final cause remained unascertained. The public reports do not tell us that Rhys had far too much to drink or anything like that, and there is no forensic report available saying that he passed away as a result of drowning. An accidental water-related passing is compatible with the location, but compatible is not the same thing as proven. It also doesn't readily explain the clothing. There are circumstances in which disoriented people, usually through the later stages of hypothermia, remove clothes. And clothing can be moved in water or be separated during a prolonged period outdoors. But it's not really clear at all what happened here. One issue with wanting to blame hypothermia in this instance is that he disappeared in the summer. In Glasgow that evening, it was around 19 degrees Celsius. And although the temperatures obviously drop overnight, it only fell to about 14 degrees. So, hypothermia itself seems unlikely to have occurred unless there are factors that are missing. In fairness, immersion hypothermia is different. Water pulls heat from the body far faster than air, roughly 25 times quicker. Though it is important to say that I have no idea what temperature the water on the marshland would have been sitting at. That reasoning is also hard to stretch all the way to a trainer being found up a tree. Clothing can shift in water or be spread around over 2 weeks outdoors, but a shoe doesn't end up in a tree by itself or by accident. I suppose, perhaps, if you wanted to argue in favour of the accidental scenario, you could also suggest that maybe an animal transported the shoe up the tree. I have no idea how likely that would be though. So, Rhys was found without his shoes, socks, trousers and shorts on. And it's really not clear at all how that came to pass. It's also not clear how the cap came to be where it was either. A second possibility then is third-party involvement. Rhys was last seen in the company of someone else. He was allegedly seen entering the wetlands with a person. His clothing was found apart from him, and there was no established medical explanation for his passing. Those are the main points that have caused the family and others to question whether something happened to him out there. But again, a collection of unanswered questions is not proof that someone attacked him. The full account given to police by the woman has never been published, though later reporting suggests that information from her helped lead officers towards the search area and Rhys's clothing. We do not know which parts of her account were corroborated, but there has been no charge, no court finding, and no official statement identifying her, or anyone really, as being responsible for a crime. Rhys left home expecting to return that night, and his mum described him as healthy and happy. There are no reported messages suggesting that he planned or had any intention of wanting to disappear forever, so to speak, and no publicly documented crisis leading up to the 24th. It can never be ruled out completely, I suppose, because you can never truly know what is happening inside the mind of another, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence suggesting it was the case. The real difficulty is that the evidence that we have does not strongly separate any one scenario from the others. Almost 2 weeks passed before Rhys was found. The condition of the remains limited the medical examinations, and the final stretch of his journey was reconstructed partly through witnesses rather than definitive CCTV or anything like that. Once the door-to-door enquiries near the recovery site were missed, there was no way to recreate that lost opportunity years later with the same reliability. It would also be interesting to know why the decision was made to close the investigations 4 days after his body was found. I can see why many seem to feel that decision was made somewhat prematurely, especially since there was some backtracking later on with statements made about ongoing inquiries, even though whatever that meant also wasn't clear. As of the 12th of August 2026, I could find no public record of anyone being charged in connection with Rhys's passing, and no new understanding in regards to how he came to pass away. His passing remains unexplained and unascertained, while the position of Police Scotland remains that no criminality was established. What can be said with certainty is that real mistakes were made in the aftermath. Police Scotland acknowledged that door-to-door inquiries were not carried out, and PERC found problems in the way that several complaints were handled. The wrong coordinates and confused recovery location created a breakdown of trust that should never really have happened. None of that proves that Rhys had been involved in foul play, but neither does it provide the family with a reliable explanation of how a healthy 19-year-old left home and was found in such a scene in the marshlands 15 days later. In the end, 2 questions remain alongside one another. What happened to Rhys after he walked through Easter Road on the evening of the 24th of July? And did the investigation preserve every realistic chance of finding out? The first may now be extremely difficult to answer. The second should exist somewhere within the search records, correspondence, and decision logs from 2019. With that though, that does about bring us to the end of this. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you found the video interesting, then please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, look after each other, and peace.